All right, so the purpose of this video is to demonstrate how to just put an equation, a couple of equations in Excel, and where one thing is connected to another thing. So if you have a scenario where you have some distance of z, and you have a partial distance there of w and another partial distance of d, and you're trying to figure out the velocity final of some object. It has a velocity, the initial, it's a given of 2, acceleration of 7. And you actually don't know d, but you can get d from another equation. This is pretty obvious. Z minus w would equal d. How could you set this up so you could quickly input numbers of, say, z and w, and then it would automatically calculate v for you? And so this is a good example. This is a downloaded Windows version of Excel, but this process would be very similar to any Excel you get, albeit on iOS or online versions or even Google Sheets. This all would be very similar. Excel is a little finicky, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. But the first thing I start doing, it's always one of those deals where you can clean it up as you go. You can color code things. There's some things you can do that I'll show you, but I just like to start by typing in sort of what's needing to happen. So I'll start with this first equation here, z minus w equals d. And a great thing is you can just actually type z, and then I'm going to click over. I've just picked a random spot. Now, if I want to just write the equation, if I try to hit minus and then I go over, this thing's going to freak out. It's thinking I'm doing some kind of equation here, and if I click, it does that. Sometimes my hack way of doing this, my workaround is I just will type the word. Now, there's probably a way, I think you could probably put quotes, or there would be symbols you could put so Excel wouldn't think you're wanting to actually subtract something. But I just type what I want to do. Z minus W equals, this works, and it makes more sense to me doing it this way. So I'm guessing it'll probably help you. So as you can see, Z minus W equals D. Now, what we can do is we can color code things, and I love doing this. So I'll always put a color, and I'll say input. And then I will color code it, this little block right here. Click out and I click back so then I can color it. I'll do my inputs of, say, yellow. And then I like to color code outputs. These are things that it does for me. I like to color code those green. I don't know why, it's just what I like to do. So we'll say inputs and outputs. Now Z is going to be an input and W is an input, so I'm going to color code that yellow and yellow. This is a quick way of me looking at it and knowing where I need to type numbers. And I'm going to color code D as an output. I think I did that one. There we go. And so D, this is where the money shot is, equals this minus that. You'll notice it's going in here, but also it's showing you the equation up here, and then we hit enter. Now right now it's 0, but say if Z was 100, I type in 100, and W was 25, boom, it tells us D is 75. So this is how you can easily calculate something like D. Now down here, this equation is significantly more complicated, but I could do a similar equation, and I'll just say start right over here, and I can type these words out. Now what's going to happen is, instead of typing velocity, I'm just going to use V final squared. Again, there would be quicker ways of doing this, but making it cleaner. But sometimes, who cares? Now this gets all messy there. That's bleeding over into that. You can always go up here and just make these bigger. And oftentimes you will. Space isn't really too much of an issue. Obviously, you can just scroll around. And so I can say V final squared equals V initial squared see how this is kind of running over the top of each other? We can just make that bigger so that we can see it all. Times 2 You also could probably put the number 2 in there if you wanted. Might be easier. I don't know that I always would do that should say acceleration. Well, I'll just leave it A. And then D. You could type the words out if you wanted to, but now I just showed this whole equation here. Now, what we can do here is we can actually say input V initial squared, but this is this an input? I don't really know what V initial squared is. We're going to start out with this equation. To do this, you only can have a couple of unknowns. And so for this setup, we're going to say as if we knew velocity initial was always going to be 2 and acceleration is always going to be 7. So, so then we could say velocity initial squared. What would that be? This would be something that you already have to start with. So this could be equals 2 times 2. And when we hit enter, that should show 4. Now, of course, it could be that we have, and we could even make an input here of velocity initial, and I could make this yellow to show it's an input, and I could make that 2. And then we could make this, instead of 2 times 2, we could actually do equals this. You just click on it, times, and click on it again, enter, and it's going to show the exact same thing. So that's the way I'll probably do this. We'll make this another input, so you have to do acceleration. We're going to call acceleration 7 for this scenario. So you could put this acceleration, click over here for this is acceleration, equals this box, enter. So see this box, if you click on it, you would know that, okay, it's equaling that box. All right, so this is going to be 2. Now here is where this can be so cool. This D, as we see right here, is connected to this D, which is connected to this equation. So this output right here is actually going to be this D right here. So we can click equals, and then we'll click this square, enter. So now watch what happens if we change this to 150. When we hit enter, this is going to change. D is going to change based on these inputs. This is where this gets really, really cool. So we now at this point we can put this equation in. There are a couple ways to do this. We can put all of this in. So for V final squared, I can say this equals, it's going to equal this plus, notice probably you want to be looking up here, also down here. Sometimes this gets pretty crowded. Now, I need to put parentheses around this to show all of these other things happen at the same time. This is just like putting things into a graphing calculator. Equals that plus this times this times this, close parentheses. Enter. Now this actually isn't my answer. This isn't my velocity final, but this is my velocity final squared. And we've got one more step to find velocity final squared, but there we could do that. You also, just as a side note, you could do, if these parentheses confuse you, you also could have made a column you could have made a cell that would have been these 3 things times each other. So you could have done something like this right here equals this one times this one times this one, enter. And then you have a cell here that represents 2AD multiplied. And then you could have said, instead of over here, instead of E21 plus these 3, you could have deleted that. And you just could have clicked this square here, and you'll get the exact same answer. Sometimes the more things you have in a given square, it can get confusing and mess up. Sometimes separating them, just like on a calculator, is useful, but that would be up to you. For the sake of this one, I'm not going to do that. That's a little messy for me, and so the parentheses is a good system. Oh, see, this thing right here can happen. And in this case, if I go up and look, I can see I put an extra times there. And so if I delete that, it'll fix it. That kind of thing can happen, is sometimes why you want to separate things. So then the final thing we would want to do is we might even put it somewhere like right here. Maybe for our final answer, I can say um, let's make it nice and pretty. And we can say velocity final. So this square right here is going to equal the square root. So if you SQ square root RT, and then we're going to put in parentheses this cell here, close parentheses, enter. So velocity final, and we can maybe color code this a different thing to make a nice little answer so we could see it really quick. If we clicked on there, we know the final answer. So we can even have a key over here, answers. And we could color code that, enter, click on there again. That, so we could see this. Now, some things you can do here sometimes to clean it up, you can highlight it. There's a way on here, if I can find it. It's right here. This was marked on erase and it was confusing me. Sometimes it's worth, you can take your equations just to kind of clean it up, and you can show like a thick outside border. You can say, oh, okay, this is definitely a thing. Or you could do something like, well, I want to show maybe something bigger. I want to kind of put a container around that. So you can say, well, this is a thing. Oh, so this would certainly be how you could connect equations. Of course, you could go on to the next step. There's color coding. But hopefully this helps. Thank you, and make sure to have fun with Excel.